Hey guys, welcome back. I hope you are having an amazing day. Let's get right into the stories. The first one is an entitled People story. I've lived in my house on Elm Street for over 15 years. It's a modest two-story home, but the real highlight is the in-ground pool out back. I saved up for years before I could finally afford to put it in. Now, during those long, hot summer days, my pool provides a refreshing oasis from the heat. A few months back, the house next door sold. I was hopeful some nice new neighbors would move in. Boy, was I wrong. Karen and her husband Bill bought the place. From day one, they rubbed me the wrong way. Karen complained about the eyesore of my vegetable garden, even though she hadn't done a lick of landscaping herself. Bill griped about the height of my back fence, convinced I was spying on them over it. They were a real piece of work. I did my best to be courteous, but Karen and Bill seemed determined to make enemies out of me and the rest of the neighborhood. They let their dog run wild, barking and pooping everywhere. They called the cops when some kids accidentally hit a baseball into their yard. Karen even had the audacity to demand I trim a tree on my property because it blocked her view. Despite this, I maintained hope we could work things out amicably. That is, until the 4th of July rolled around. Every year, I host an Independence Day cookout and invite all the neighbors. There's good food, conversation, and of course, swimming. I dropped the invites in everyone's mailbox a week ahead of time. The day of the party, everything was going great, until I caught a glimpse of Karen marching across her lawn toward me. I tensed up, wondering what complaint she had brewed up this time. "Hello, Karen. Can I help you with something?" I asked politely. She huffed and pointed toward my fenced-in pool area. "Yes, you can open up that gate and let my family in to swim and use the pool facilities." I was flabbergasted by her audacity. "Excuse me? This is a private event, Karen. Pool access is for invited guests only." "Don't be ridiculous," she snapped. "It's sweltering out here and you have a whole pool just sitting there unused. Why can't we use it too? Don't be so selfish." I took a deep breath, willing myself to stay calm. "Karen, you can't just invite yourself to my party and make demands." I gestured at the dozens of happy guests. "As you can see, the pool is in use by friends and neighbors. I'm going to have to ask you to please leave." Karen's face turned an angry shade of red. For a minute, I thought she might actually hit me. Instead, she whirled around, stomped back to her house, and slammed the door shut. I shook my head, hoping that was the end of our altercation. I rejoined the party, laughing and mingling with my guests. After about 20 minutes, I noticed 2 police cars pulling up in front of my home. A sense of dread washed over me as I saw Karen speaking animatedly with one of the officers, pointing accusingly in my direction. They started walking toward me. "Is there a problem, officers?" I asked, cautiously. "Ma'am here tells me you assaulted her and then refused her access to the pool on your property," said the officer, who I realized was new to our town. I almost laughed out loud. "That is absolutely not true, sir. This is my home and my pool on my property. She and her husband were not invited to my private 4th of July party. When Karen demanded I let her in to use the pool, I politely refused." The officer frowned, seemingly confused by my contrasting story. "Do you have proof you own this home and pool, ma'am?" "Of course," I said. I invited them to come to my front door, where I showed the officer my driver's license confirming my address. I also provided the deed to the house proving my ownership. For extra evidence, I pulled up my property tax records and pool installation invoices on my computer. The officer nodded as he looked over the documents. "Well, it seems clear you're telling the truth about owning this home and pool." He turned to Karen with a disapproving look. Karen's eyes widened in shock. She clearly wasn't expecting me to have concrete proof that she was lying. But she assaulted me! You have to arrest her!" Karen screeched. The officer frowned. "Based on the evidence, it appears you tried to trespass on this woman's property and then made false accusations against her. I'd be careful if I were you. We take these kinds of frivolous calls very seriously." Karen stood there gaping and sputtering in disbelief before the officers escorted her back to her house. I thanked them profusely for their help. Before the cops left, I had an idea. "Officers, would you like to stay for a burger and swim? It's the least I can do after you dealt with that unpleasantness." They smiled and happily agreed. The party carried on even better than before. We all got a good laugh at Karen's ridiculous behavior. Though she was the talk of the party, I didn't let Karen's antics ruin my 4th of July fun. If anything, it only brought the neighborhood even closer together. Later that week, I received a handwritten apology card from Karen. She claimed temporary insanity from the heat and said she hoped we could be cordial neighbors going forward. I had my doubts about her sincerity, but I was willing to give it a shot. The rest of the summer passed without incident. Karen and Bill mostly kept to themselves. The neighborhood returned to its peaceful ways. Still, I decided to install video cameras around the property just in case of any future problems. Something told me this wouldn't be my last run-in with the combative couple next door, but at least now I knew I had the truth and the law on my side. The next one is a pro-revenge story. To start with a little backstory, I was 16 years old and working at my first job at a major fast food chain. The restaurant was a franchise, and the franchise owner, let's call him Mike, owned multiple franchise locations across the city. Below him, there was the guy who dealt with the day-to-day operations of the locations, let's call him Jeff. Now at my restaurant, there was the general manager, who I will call Carmela, and multiple shift managers. I worked there for only about 4 months before I secured a better job. I turned in my 2-week notice directly to Carmela. I specifically stated a date in which my employment would end and had a short conversation with Carmela, confirming the details. Come my final week, I was scheduled the day before the date I had listed on my notice. Carmela also went off on vacation that week and put a shift manager in charge of scheduling and keeping track of hours. When I showed up for work on my last day, I went to clock in and was unable to do so. Apparently, I was removed from the login system a day short of when I was supposed to be. No problem. I will just record my clock times manually, and I worked my shift like normal while recording my clock times on a piece of receipt paper. At the end of my shift, I had the shift manager post the receipt paper on the corkboard, and he sent a message to Carmela to adjust my hours accordingly since I couldn't clock that day. The total time I worked was around 5 hours. I took a picture of the receipt paper showing my hours posted on the corkboard, so I was sure I had proof that I was there. Come payday, Jeff was there, and I personally turned my uniform into him and picked up my check. I have always kept very accurate records of my hours and discovered that my paycheck was short the exact amount of time I worked on my last day. I immediately brought it to Jeff's attention and gave him a rundown of what happened. He gave me his phone number to text him the whole situation and send him the picture I took so that he had it written down. He told me he was going to get it figured out and follow up with me. Over the course of a couple of weeks, I followed up multiple times with no response. I felt at this point the wait was getting ridiculous, so I got in contact with HR for the restaurant's corporate operations. I was basically told that since I worked at a franchise, there was nothing they could do, and that I had to get in contact with the franchise owner directly. After failing to find contact information for Mike, I decided to go to the labor board for help. The labor board informed me that since they did not pay me in full for the hours worked, I was entitled to back pay of 8 hours every day they did not pay me, up to 30 days. The labor board opened a case and immediately started attempting to contact the franchise owner to no avail. Eventually, they sent a letter to the franchise owner's home address directly, and I received a call from Mike on a Friday asking me why the labor board is going after him. I gave him a complete rundown of everything that happened, and he told me that this was the first time he had heard about the situation. We arranged to meet at the restaurant a few days later. When we met, we had a very open conversation about my time there. I told him everything about issues that were arising with managers all the way to not being able to clock in on my last day. At this point, if the labor dispute went to court, he would be looking at thousands of dollars in back pay due to how long it was taking to get it sorted out. We agreed to settle it for around $500. I felt on top of the world because my missing wages were only $45 or so. I visited the restaurant a few weeks later and found out that since the case was settled, a lot of things changed. Come to find out, Carmela and Jeff were hiding the case from Mike by destroying the letters and not responding to the calls from the labor board. They also were preventing contact with Mike by removing his contact information from the break room and refusing to make it available to employees. Mike fixed all of that by permanently posting his information in the break room, and even set up a 1-800 number that he posted behind the registers so that if any customers had complaints, they could submit a complaint to him directly. I'm not sure what happened with Jeff and Carmela, but I know the management was rearranged due to the issues I brought up with him in our conversation. Evidently, my new job was at a major drugstore chain that Carmela used as her pharmacy. A few months later, while I was working, Carmela came in and noticed I worked there. Shortly after, I found out from the pharmacy department that she started going to the pharmacy of another location. The next one is a petty revenge story. A few months ago, I was out running errands on the weekend. One of my errands had me pick up some cupcakes from a local bakery for D&D. This local bakery makes fabulous cupcakes with unique frosting flavors. Lavender honey is my personal favorite, so they are pretty popular. Due to their popularity, I had ordered ahead. Unfortunately, the woman behind me didn't. Insert entitled Karen. As soon as she queued up, I felt slightly queasy. It was likely due to her perfume, but alas, something more was off. It did not take long for her to complain about the length of the line. There were maybe 4 people in front of me, honestly not that bad, but it's a small shop, so it can take some time to process everyone. Instead of looking at her phone and scrolling through Instagram like a normal human being, Karen decided to whine and moan about how slow the service was. This, of course, made everything feel infinitely slower. Once a few people had been processed, and she could see the glass cabinets, she decided to complain about the lack of variety. It was at this point that the front-staffed employee, who was ringing up someone else, told her that what they had on display was the last of the morning batch. If she wanted specific flavors, Karen would either have to wait for the afternoon batch to be finished or order ahead next time. Karen didn't like that. She huffed about how a bakery, again small locally owned with a maximum of 2 bakers, should obviously make more cupcakes than they can sell because what if she wants a dozen of their seasonal flavor? The employee tried to explain how they made only a certain amount each day and that this is their policy. Again, she could order ahead or come back later. Now, this entire time I had been scrolling on my phone, again like a normal human being, and didn't figure Karen would do anything besides make buzzing noises. I was wrong. We were standing more or less next to one another at the time since it was my turn to pick up my order. Karen's face went into a shade of red I can only describe as overheated pig. She then started berating the employee at how unfair the whole thing was. She just continued to sputter about the atrocity of not having the cupcakes she wanted. Now, it is never okay to scream at someone who is just doing their job. What Karen didn't know was that I had eaten curry the night before. 2 bowls, in fact. I had deliberately been holding my sphincter shut to avoid gassing out anyone. However, I decided to let my butt blow a fellow a hole a kiss. I turned myself slightly to get ample aim and let it rip. A faint hissing was heard, most likely only by me, as Karen continued yelling. She then suddenly stopped. It's as if the world slowed as her nostrils sniffed the now pungent air. She gagged ever so slightly, but I heard the disgust. It took everything in me not to erupt with laughter. I pray the employee didn't get caught in the crossfire. They were a few feet away due to the counter, but Karen certainly took the full blast. Luckily, no one else was behind her. I left the shop with my delicious dozen and a little bit lighter. The next one is a malicious compliance story. In the 80s, I lost everything I could. I dropped out of college, my father died of a heart attack, and my mother was somewhere in the wind. I wasn't worth the air I was breathing. As a last effort, I saved up some money to move to a different state so that I could start fresh. I chose Montana to be my new home. Because I didn't have a college degree, I knew I could only make a living with my hands and not my head. After a bit of looking around, I found work on a ranch. The owner of the ranch, let's call him Jack, took me under his wing. He taught me how to ride a horse, how to herd, how to do cutting, roping, and many other useful skills on a ranch. My goal was to have enough money for a deposit so I could buy a house, or at least some land. After about 3 years, I had the money, but I loved the ranch and the folks so much that I chose to stay longer. In the spring of '88, I finally made the decision to quit. I was fully honest with Jack about what my intentions were. I told him that I wanted to buy some land to have a ranch of my own and potentially get married and start a family. Being the absolute champ, Jack offered me some contacts of people who were selling land. After some time, I chose a piece of land near Jack's ranch. I got a loan, bought the land, and in the summer, I started building my house. By winter, the house was done, and it was planned that in the spring, I'll build a barn and some fences, corrals, among others. In the spring, it was back to work, and before summer started, I had nothing to do. I had a lot of time on my hands while I was waiting for all the paperwork to be done. And I wasn't going to spend 2 weeks sitting on my porch doing nothing when Jack promised me that if I would ever need it, he would give me a job. Now, I didn't need a job because of money, but I just didn't have anything to do. So I went to my good old friend Jack if he needed some help. He said that he could use me to guide people on the tours he was offering. His ranch is not only in the cattle business, he also offers tours of the pristine nature on his property. I happily accepted the job despite me not liking people, but still, it was better than just sitting on my front porch and doing nothing. The first few days went without a problem, but then a wild Karen appeared to brighten up the day. I was just returning from a tour when I saw this Karen in the middle of the field yelling at this girl who was also a guide. I didn't know the girl, but in my books, whoever makes a girl cry is an a-hole. I came over to them and, in the most passive-aggressive voice I can, I say, "Good day. What seems to be the problem?" And the Karen's wrath was now aimed at me, and she yelled back, "This idiot has no respect for the desires of the customer. Give me a manager now!" Now, I didn't expect such strong wording, but I kept my cool despite my hot-headedness, and I came up to the girl who's now sobbing because this Karen was mouthing off to her pretty good, and I say to her, "Leave her to me. I'll take care of her. You go take a break and tell Jack that I'll be with this piece of work." She gives me a grateful smile and a nod and rides away. I go to the Karen and I say to her, "Ma'am, I can't get you the manager as he's busy right now, but if you want, I can be your guide in her stead for the remainder of the tour." She replies very politely by saying, "Sure, I think even the trees will be better than that idiot." Every part of my hot-headed self wants me to pretty much bury this woman right then and there, but I keep my cool, and we head off on the tour. And within the first minute, what a piece of work she truly is. She behaves like she knows best, and everyone is lesser than her, and everything should be given to her. When we are about to turn around and go back, I give her a choice. We could either go the official route, or we could return by the unofficial route, which is shorter, but there were bear sightings reported in the past few days. I tell her that the unofficial route is quite dangerous, but just as I wanted her to do so, she vehemently objects because she is the wisest person alive and knows the best. Great, my trap had worked. After about 5 miles on this unofficial route, she starts screaming and turns so pale that she is even more white than paper. In the distance, there is a grizzly. I knew about the danger I dragged both of us into, but in the end, it was technically her choice to go that route. I tell her to make herself as big and loud as she can. I follow suit, but the bear keeps getting closer. It keeps growling at us. With every growl, Karen was getting ever more pale. After it gets way too dangerous, I shoot a round out of my rifle, and the bear gets scared and runs away into the woods. The entire ride back, she keeps yelling at me that I put her intentionally in so much danger. And yes, I'll admit, it was quite reckless taking a visitor into a part of the woods where there were bear sightings reported, but technically she made the decision to go that route. I stay silent the entire ride because I can't keep a straight face. I was laughing maniacally in my head, and I knew that if I looked at her, I would start laughing out loud. When we returned, she was shaking violently and was pale as ever. After I tied up her horse, she demanded that I get her the manager, and I gladly point her to the little building in the distance, and she storms off. She starts yelling at Jack, and I can see that Jack is trying his hardest not to break out laughing. I could hear that she was demanding that I be fired, but the neat part was, I wasn't an employee of Jack's. I was doing it as a favor for a friend, and thus, I couldn't be fired. After the Karen's tirade ends, Jack comes to me laughing like a kid, and he asks me, "How did you even come up with that, OP?" I start giggling as well and answer, "Well, she made the girl cry, so I wanted to give her special treatment. I heard of the bear sightings, and it worked out well in my favor." He then asked me not to do that again as it was reckless, and I agree, and I tell Jack. I don't plan on doing it again, but I had a plan if the bear mauled the damn wretch. My defense would be that I gave her the choice to go on a safer path, but because she was apparently of higher intellect than me, I simply agreed. Jack gives me a smile and heads off. Years later, my father would end up meeting that girl guide again. Her name was Abby, but nowadays I simply call her Mom. Thank you for watching. I would really appreciate it if you could like the video and subscribe to our channel if you haven't already. We'll see you again tomorrow.